Hello, everybody, and just allow me to welcome you all to this event today, discussing the history of the Commonwealth through objects in the Royal Collection. And we're streaming live from the Royal Collection Trust. And I am joined today by Rachel Peat Underhill, Curator of Decorative Arts here at the Royal Collection. And she's here to give up her time, thankfully, and share some beautiful objects that have been collected throughout the years from the Commonwealth to celebrate the Commonwealth on its 75th anniversary today. Just some housekeeping today. We do have a chat function. And in that chat function, we do welcome you to ask any questions you may have, because there will be a chance for those questions to be answered at the end. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can in the end. This event is also live closed captioned. So if you click the button with the CC icon, it will be closed captioned for you. So without any further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to Rachel. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm delighted to be with you today on Commonwealth Day 2024 and to give you a history of the Commonwealth from its very earliest origins right up to the present day through outstanding gifts that have been received over the years. The most sacred point of the Commonwealth, the coronation ceremony last year, featured this screen, which concealed His Majesty the King during the anointing. And you can see it pictured here at St James's Palace, just before the coronation took place in Westminster Abbey itself. But crucially, the central design of this anointing screen represents the Commonwealth. A design of a tree of life with 56 leaves, each painstakingly embroidered by the Royal School of Needlework with the names of the members of the Commonwealth nations. And it's just one example of how the Commonwealth has been central to the monarchy for over a century. And today, the anointing screen forms part of the Royal Collection. So it's a visual expression of many of the rich cultures and traditions which today make up the Commonwealth. But what is the Commonwealth? Well, it's a voluntary association of independent nations united by common values of prosperity, of peace, and democracy. And today it covers 1/3 of the world's population. So it's got 56 members spanning 2.5 billion people. The newest member is Togo, which joined in 2022. And in this talk, we're going to consider the long history of the Commonwealth and the varied ways that it's represented in the Royal Collection today. So we'll think particularly about gift giving and the royal occasions and visits that have prompted that, as well as some of the traditions of presentation and exchange which underpin those really important moments. And most of all, we're going to look at the vibrant cultures, the material, the techniques cherished across the world by Commonwealth members, which are reflected in these works which are in the Royal Collection today. Now, we'll spend a lot of time talking about the history of the Commonwealth. So we'll spend a little bit of this first part thinking about the 19th century. And that's because the vast majority of member nations of the modern Commonwealth were formerly parts of the historic British Empire. Though today there are many member nations that have no historic links whatsoever. But looking back to the 19th century, we can trace some of the ways that the early imperial interaction and artistic exchange and ceremony paved the way for modern gift giving. So we're heading right back to the reign of Queen Victoria, who came to the throne aged just 18 in 1837. And on her accession to the throne, she received letters and gifts from rulers across the globe, including from territories that are now part of the Commonwealth, congratulating her on her accession. So this illuminated letter is from the regent of the Carnatic and was written in Persian, offering his hopes that Almighty God would make her accession happy and prosperous. And he ends by saying, "May the star of your Majesty's reign shine forever." Now, during Queen Victoria's reign, there was a huge amount of artistic exchange, again, by nations and regions which today are part of the Commonwealth. And this found a really profound expression in the 1851 Great Exhibition, which was held at the Crystal Palace in London. Now, this exhibition space was devoted to manufactures from Britain, but also from all over the globe, showcasing the arts, the techniques, the materials of those cultures. There were over 100,000 exhibits, and they were visited by 6 million people, including Queen Victoria herself, who attended not once, but 44 times. And at that exhibition, there were displayed some gifts from across what is now the Commonwealth. So among the works of art displayed in the India Court included a gift recently sent to the Queen from the Maharaja of Travancore. You can see it here. It's this carved throne made from ivory, reflecting the historic tastes of the time. And he'd been sent by the Maharaja to Queen Victoria to showcase really the commercial and artistic prowess of the region. It was a real effort to demonstrate the skills and to promote trade, particularly with Travancore. Queen Victoria loved this chair so much that she made it the central part of the Indian court at the exhibition. And she was later photographed sitting on it when she was proclaimed Empress of India. And you can see that photograph from 1876. Now, by the time Queen Victoria celebrated her Golden Jubilee in 1887, members of what became the Commonwealth were very closely represented. This image shows a procession down Regent Street in London, which today looks very different. You can see the Queen in her carriage, and she is preceded by an Indian cavalry escort. Gifts were received from all over what's now the Commonwealth for the Golden Jubilee. And this shows the Waterloo Chamber at Windsor Castle, filled with presents that were sent from Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, British Guyana, the Cape Colony, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. And in fact, today we can identify some of the gifts that are in the royal collection in this photograph. So this painting here was made by Raja Ravi Varma, who was a celebrated painter who particularly depicted the Ramayana and other scenes. He'd been awarded first prize at the Vienna Art Exhibition in 1873. And this probably shows his daughter as the sitter, and she is holding a casket containing a loyal address from the ladies of Travancore to Queen Victoria. So it's a gift depicting the presentation of another gift. After these works were presented from all across the globe, Queen Victoria wanted to share these with the wider general public and make them accessible to as many as possible. So not only was a special exhibition put on in St. James's Palace, but she then arranged for their permanent display in a room called the Grand Vestibule at Windsor Castle. And this is key to sharing some of those Commonwealth cultures. The Queen herself selected the room, and she commissioned specially made oak cases, which you can see in this photograph. And here on the left are some of the remarkable caskets from India, which were included in that display, open to the public at that time. Other gifts that had been presented were sent to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, which was Queen Victoria's seaside residence. And here she really imbibed many of the design aesthetics from across the globe, and in particular India, which you can see reflected in this room, which was known as the Indian Room or the Durbar Room. It was inspired by the designs of John Lockwood Kipling, who was director of the Mayo School of Art, and he worked with the foremost architect of the Punjab, Raibam Singh, to create this room, which includes the Hindu god Ganesh above the door and Quranic inscriptions running beneath the gallery. So here we find the Commonwealth coming home, as it were, and finding its expression in the furnishing of the royal residences. Gifts were also presented when Queen Victoria's son, King Edward VII, came to the throne for his coronation in 1902. The Maharaja of Jaipur travelled by boat. He chartered a ship which contained copper vats of water from the river Ganges to sustain him and his retinue of 400 followers on their visit to Britain. And on his arrival, he presented the new king with this sword and scabbard. And you can see the glittering scabbard is set with 719 diamonds. And we think they probably have a combined weight of about 2,000 carats. And you'll see as well, there's the inscription, presentation inscription on the blade. This is important at royal moment with the new reign. Now, over time, different countries of the British Empire gained different levels of freedom from Britain, and semi-independent countries came to be called dominions. And leaders of the dominions attended conferences with Britain from 1887 with growing degrees of sovereignty and autonomy. And it was agreed in 1926 that they were all equal members of a Commonwealth of nations. And this is sort of the early beginnings of what we now know as the modern Commonwealth. And this is expressed a little bit in the fact that Australia created its own democratic mission in a building called Australia House, that then at that time was called the Commonwealth Buildings in London. And these buildings were opened by King George V in 1913. And here you can see the ceremonial trowel that he used to lay the foundation stone. The blade is gold, and it's got engravings of a crown and a royal coat of arms, as well as the shield of Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia. As various colonies of the British Empire gained increasing independence, many of those who advocated most strongly for that independence continued to send gifts to the British Crown. This is Mahatma Gandhi, who was one of the absolute leaders of Indian calls for independence. And in 1947, the same year that India achieved independence, Mahatma Gandhi sent to Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II, this shawl as a wedding gift. And it's made from yarn that Gandhi had spun himself and woven together. And in the very center are the words Jai Hind, which literally mean Hail India. And this was sent with a message for a blessing for a long and happy life in the service of man. But here you can see this Commonwealth gift is both a gift and an expression of affection, but also a real political statement about the increasing independence of this nation. India, as I mentioned, became independent in 1947 and wanted to remain a member of the Commonwealth, but also to be a republic, so not to have a British sovereign. And it was agreed in 1949 in London, according to something called the London Declaration, that republics and other countries could be part of the Commonwealth without the British sovereign as their sovereign. And so that was the sort of birth of the modern Commonwealth of Nations as we know it today. And it's the 75th anniversary of that moment today. Over time, numerous countries achieved independence from the British Empire. And here you can see some pictures of those independence ceremonies, many of which were attended by the late Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, as well as the King when he was Prince of Wales. Some became independent republics, others remained as what we call Commonwealth realms. So Papua New Guinea is a Commonwealth realm with the British sovereign as sovereign. In 1995, Mozambique became the first country to gain entry to the Commonwealth, had never been part of the British Empire or under control of any other member. And so today there are 15 Commonwealth realms, as well as the independent nation members, which are republics within the Commonwealth. So let's think a little bit more about that royal gift giving and what has prompted it. In many instances, it's been royal events. So we've already mentioned jubilees. And coming up into the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, on her 21st birthday, she made a speech in 1947 in Cape Town in South Africa, where she was staying. She said famously, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." This message was broadcast across the Commonwealth, and the Queen actually had to take up that mantle of service much sooner than she expected, because when King George VI died and she came to the throne in 1952, she became head of the Commonwealth. And this was reflected almost immediately in her coronation. In 1953, her coronation took place in Westminster Abbey, and 9 designs were submitted by Norman Hartnell for her coronation dress. The Queen herself selected her favourites, but she came up with her own additions. She requested that in addition to having embroidered 4 national emblems for the United Kingdom, that also the emblems of the Dominions should be included. And so you get the flowers, showing, for example, the fern for New Zealand, the wattle for Australia, the maple leaf for Canada, literally stitched into the garment worn by the sovereign at that important occasion. And so the Commonwealth is there right at the heart of that coronation ceremony. That was reinforced as well in these pieces, which are called armills, which are kind of gold armlets placed on the sovereign's wrist during the coronation service. And they are ancient symbols of knighthood and military leadership. And new ones were made for the Queen as a gift from the Commonwealth in 1953. And they're engraved inside with the words, presented for the coronation of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II by the governments of the United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, Pakistan, Ceylon, and Southern Rhodesia. And they're made from 22-carat gold, and you'll see there's a Tudor rose on the hinges where they open. The Commonwealth also featured in some of the decorations for that coronation in 1953. This picture shows 18-year-old Frederick Hyde, who was an art student working as part of a team of 10 artists, preparing very large murals reflecting the different emblems of the self-governing countries of the Commonwealth, which were placed around Parliament Square for the coronation procession. The Queen was also presented with this vase from the British Pottery Manufacturers Federation, apologies. And what it does is it represents each of the then members of the Commonwealth. So around the top, you've got the emblems or arms of each of the member nations. And John Wadsworth, who was the designer, said, the idea came to me in about 10 minutes, and the initial idea took only a week. But the vase itself is probably the most complicated design ever executed in the history of bone china. And it does look magnificent. Examples were made for every Commonwealth member nation at that time. So one was presented to Queen Elizabeth II, and then the rest was sent to each of the member states, which is a really lovely touch. Being head of the Commonwealth is not a hereditary title, but in 2018, Commonwealth leaders decided that His Majesty the King, Charles III, would take the title after Queen Elizabeth II. And so, as we mentioned at the start, this coronation screen featured the Commonwealth very heavily. And in 2023, this time last year, on Commonwealth Day, His Majesty the King hosted a Commonwealth reception at Buckingham Palace. And beforehand, he signed a Commonwealth charter. You can see him doing that here, upholding the 16 core values of the association. And just in front of him, in front of the desk or table where he's sitting, is what's known as the Commonwealth Mace, which had been presented to the late Queen in 1992 for the 40th anniversary of her accession to the throne. And it's actually enamelled with each of the flags of the member nations of the Commonwealth as they were in 1992. And today that's kept at the Commonwealth Institute. One of the key things that's prompted a lot of gift giving across the Commonwealth has been royal tours. And again, this is something that harks right back to the 19th century and beyond. The first official British royal tour of Canada actually took place in 1860. This was Queen Victoria's son, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, who went as her representative. And he described to his mother a reception that was very enthusiastic, but very fatiguing. He travelled extensively over Canada and received gifts while he was there. One example are a series of baskets that were presented by the First Nations Mississauga community in what's now Ontario. You can see one on screen at the moment. And what's remarkable is we actually have the names of the First Nations women who made these baskets, which is extremely unusual for Indigenous gifts from this date, which often weren't recorded. That's because there are presentation labels supplied indicating whether it's a gift for Prince or for Queen Victoria herself. And each basket is painstakingly, basically embroidered with dyed porcupine quills that have been threaded into birch bark to make these objects. The Prince of Wales also undertook a very extensive tour of the Indian subcontinent in 1875 to 76. Over 4 months, he visited what's now India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and visited about 22 cities or localities. And although it was stipulated that gifts shouldn't be presented during the tour, in fact, many of the rulers of local regions wanted to demonstrate their wealth, their prowess, their works of art that the regions were renowned for, and in order to cement bonds of diplomacy. So the prince received numerous examples of metalwork, arms and armour, enamelling, jewellery, books, and science and technology during his visits. One example is this turban ornament, which is in the royal collection today, which was presented by the Maharana of Udaipur. And in the late 19th century, turban ornaments of this kind were worn in parts of India to symbolize a ruler's royal status. And the gemstones here are particularly notable for their impressive size. Meanwhile, a dagger and scabbard were presented by the senior chief of Sangli, and this one has got a rock crystal hilt inlaid with rubies. Fast forward with me to 1901, and then we get a really extensive Commonwealth tour undertaken by the future King George V and Queen Mary, who were then Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and York. And the thing that prompted their visit was to go and open the first Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia. And this painting depicts that moment. It became known as the Big Picture, partly because it was so large, and partly because it took 2 years to complete. And the event looks slightly somber, and that's because everyone is still wearing black in mourning for Queen Victoria, who had died at the beginning of 1901. We have scrapbooks and invitations and images of this tour, including their time in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and South Africa. King George V himself actually calculated how far he thought they'd travelled. He reckoned they'd covered a distance of 45,000 miles, and that he'd shaken hands with 35,000 people and received over 400 loyal addresses. And many of those remain in the royal collection today. To give you some examples, on the right here, we've got this green stone urn presented by the government of New Zealand and showcasing a hard stone nephrite that is found in New Zealand. Then in the centre, here is this portiere or hanging given by the ladies of Adelaide and made by the Adelaide School of Design. And what's very interesting is that the design itself is designed to represent the Commonwealth, and is shown by having different branches woven together. And the fact that the leaves are sort of moving in the wind was described as representing some of the troubles that the Commonwealth might face, but which it would overcome and blossom in spite of. One of the next big Commonwealth visits was in 1939, when King George VI and Queen Elizabeth visited Canada. This is a really critical moment just before the Second World War. It's the first time a reigning monarch of Canada had attended a session of Parliament there in person. And it's supposed to be the time when the tradition of the royal walkabout was invented, when the Queen spontaneously walked amongst veterans in the crowd at a gathering for the unveiling of the National War Memorial. But perhaps the most famous modern tour of the Commonwealth came in 1953, when Queen Elizabeth II set sail on a coronation tour on the yacht Britannia. This was specially commissioned for that tour, which spanned 44,000 miles and was the longest ever Commonwealth tour at that date. And over the years, Britannia would carry the royal family and Queen Elizabeth II on 696 foreign visits. And this was the occasion for many of the gifts which are in the royal collection today. In 1956, the late Queen also visited Nigeria, and here you can see her standing at the entrance to the House of Representatives in Lagos. And on that occasion, the people and government of Nigeria presented the late Queen with this set of throne chairs and footstools. And they are elaborately beaded to reflect the spiritual motifs which are enjoyed and displayed by Yoruba people. So many of the zigzag motifs reflect aspects of spiritual life, such as power, the past, the future, respect for ancestors, and so on. And the beads themselves had been a real indication of wealth and status and currency in the 19th and early 20th centuries in Nigeria, to the point that it was included in parts of Nigerian regalia. And so you can see how very much this is a sort of cherished and impressive gift. In 1961, Queen Elizabeth II undertook a tour of India, Pakistan, and Nepal. And here you can see the route she took. And just one example of a gift presented on that occasion is this pair of gilt brass oil burners. So this is one of two. And they're lit on Hindu ceremonial occasions. The late Queen also visited the Caribbean, then referred to as the West Indies. And here you can see some photographs of that visit. And while in Trinidad and Tobago, she was presented with this pair of candelabra, and they represent the scarlet ibis and the coquelicot birds, which are found on the coat of arms of Trinidad and Tobago itself. Now, when Queen Elizabeth II travelled in the Commonwealth realms, so that is the places where she was sovereign, she had her own personal flag for each of those countries. So this example is Queen Elizabeth II's personal flag for Jamaica, and you can see it's got the late Queen's personal cipher in blue in the middle, but then you've got, derived from the Jamaican coat of arms, the yellow pineapples and the red cross. So there's a real fusion here in this Commonwealth object, and that would be flown from cars when the late Queen travelled, and also flown over any residence that she was residing in. Another element of these tours was the presentation of orders, and these symbols of honour were devised by each Commonwealth nation in their own manner, but often based off British orders and honours, such as the Order of the Garter. Similar idea, but in their design they always reflect something of the colours of the national flag or the flora and fauna of that country. So here are examples that were presented to Queen Elizabeth II. And just to take one, you'll see that the Canadian order has got the colours of the Canadian flag, but also an emblem in the shape of a snowflake and then a maple leaf in the very centre. But what about these actual moments of gift giving? In many cases, the presentation and exchange of these presents reflected traditional local ceremony or particular artistic ideas and practices specific to that place. This example is called a tambua. It's a whale tooth that was presented in Fiji in 1953. Whale teeth like these were collected from the jaws of beached whales. Then they would be coloured, smoked to give this sort of dark brown colour, and threaded on a sinnet cord. And they would be presented as part of a whole series of ceremonies, including marriage, mourning, speech making, and welcome. And particularly they'd be used by high-ranking chiefs, part of very codified ways of welcoming guests from overseas. So some will be presented at the moment of dropping anchor when a boat arrives. Others will be presented to indicate permission to land. And they're always held in certain ways and shown in certain ways as that presentation takes place. And you can see an example on screen in this photograph here. Another instance is in New Zealand, where commonly would be presented cloaks or capes, particularly made with the feathers of the kiwi bird, which is indigenous to New Zealand and which holds really special significance for Maori. And this example was presented to Queen Elizabeth II during her visit to New Zealand in 1954. What's very interesting, it was presented as part of a whole series of demonstrations and cultural welcome at Arawa Park. So the haka was performed, poi songs were sung, and the Queen herself actually wore on several occasions different cloaks and capes that she'd been presented. So that photograph on the left shows you an example of another cape that she was given. But the cloak on the right, she in fact retained and continued to wear on subsequent visits to the country, including when she returned for the anniversary of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1990. Now, this treaty was made between the British Crown and Maori chiefs in 1840. And in 1990, to celebrate the 150-year anniversary, this sculpture was presented to the Queen. And it marks the kind of unity or parity of that treaty. On one side, you've got a figure representing Europeans holding a quill, and on the other, you've got a figure representing Maori holding the axe. And the piece is actually made using timber from the area where the treaty was signed. So it's very representative of that important relationship between communities in that Commonwealth nation and the British Crown. Other gifts presented have taken particular motifs and techniques local to that area. So this batik from St. Kitts and Nevis uses a traditional wax resist technique to create contrasting coloured and uncolored sections. So some are left completely white and others are dyed in different sort of blocks and segments. And this design actually celebrates the island's flora and fauna, because you've got hummingbirds sucking nectar from hibiscus flowers, both of which are native to the islands. And there's also a huge amount of symbolism inherent in the gifts which are presented. This ebony carving from Mozambique was presented by the president of Mozambique in 2000. And it's the kind made by the Makonde people of Mozambique, representing their unity. And particularly it represents the unity of the clan or the community by the intertwined nature of the figures. And quite often they will culminate in the figure of a mother on the top in reflection to matrilineal tradition, but they might also have a maternal uncle, which may be the case here. What's quite interesting as well is comparing where you've got two different Commonwealth communities presenting similar objects, but rendered in very different ways that reflect their local particularities. So here on screen, I put two different stools from very different parts of the Commonwealth, one from Cameroon and one from the Bahamas. And you can see they both reflect traditions of value and honour and craftsmanship from their own backgrounds. The stool from Cameroon comes from a culture where the size and decoration of a ceremonial stool reflects the importance of its owner. So these stools would be treated with respect even when someone is not sitting on them. They might be raised up to a height, and the expensive beads that are used to cover effectively the whole surface reflect that value and status. Meanwhile, by contrast, this piece from the Bahamas, it's carved from a hardwood indigenous to the islands. And this kind of stool is traditionally reserved for a chief or an honoured guest among the Arawak peoples of the Caribbean. So two very different pieces there, but a lovely sort of connection in their presentation and meaning. I also wanted to share with you some images of monarchy that have appeared on Commonwealth gifts. And this again goes right back to the 19th century, because here is a carving of Queen Victoria from probably made by a Yoruba artist from what's now Nigeria. And you can see it's been carved in soft wood, and it was probably actually based on that image of Queen Victoria that we saw earlier. This was her official portrait as Empress of India, and it was disseminated very widely across territories of the British Empire. So it was a key kind of visual reference point for those wanting to depict or imagine Queen Victoria. And what you get here is a very interesting fusion of the Queen as she is in that photograph. So she's still holding a fan in the sculpture. She's still got a sash. But also this reflects local Yoruba artistic techniques. So in particular, the enlarged head, which is a way of showing wisdom, but also reflecting the temperament of the sitter. And the fact that she's got a very youthful face is designed to kind of suggest the serenity and long life of the subject itself. And this has actually continued into the 20th century, this sort of depiction, because here is Queen Elizabeth II depicted in a banana leaf weaving. This is from Rwanda. It was presented by the president of Rwanda in 2006. And as far as I know, it's the only image of the late Queen in banana leaf form. Certainly it's the only one in the royal collection. And you've got a very subtle effect achieved by the careful weaving and the different shades of the banana leaves used in the portrait. And this was probably based on the Queen's official Golden Jubilee photograph. So again, it's being based on another image. This depiction of Queen Elizabeth II is even more unusual, and this is a stylized portrait of the Queen as head of the Commonwealth, wearing the ceremonial headdress and jewellery of the people of Papua New Guinea. And the title of the piece is Mrs. Quinn, which is the name for Queen Elizabeth II in Tok Pisin, which is the Creole language of Papua New Guinea. And I really enjoy this complete translation of the image of Queen Elizabeth II into sort of that local visual idiom. And then a year later, this example was presented. This is a miniature truck, which is derived from the truck art of Pakistan, which had emerged particularly from the 1940s onwards, in which trucks would be painted with motifs from Sikhism or Islam, and often combined with pictures of political leaders or celebrities. And here, I don't know if you can spot, at the very back of the truck, we've got an image of the late Queen and the late Duke of Edinburgh. And this was presented during their visit to Pakistan in 1997. One theme that we've seen a lot, and I hope you've maybe spotted as we've gone through, is that Indigenous communities have often presented gifts reflecting their own relationship to the British Crown and to the Commonwealth, which they see as often separate to that with government or with the nation itself. And this mode of gift giving is really important for underlining ties of reciprocity, of kinship, but also obligations and duty and expectations, and as a way of voicing grievances. This example harks back to that visit to Canada in 1860. This mat reflects a sort of local, again, porcupine quilling tradition, which you see here. But if you spot in the centre, you've got the Prince of Wales's feathers. So that British royal motif has been incorporated into a kind of local technique and a local object, showcasing the materials and skills of the Indigenous community. And again, that's a very interesting way of showing that kind of fusion and that relationship and codependency. Fast forward to 1901, and again, that visit to Canada by the future Queen Mary and King George V. Queen Mary, when she was Duchess of Cornwall and York, was presented with this frontlet by the Tsimshan of what's now Vancouver, and it was presented by Chief Nelson as a headdress that had been passed down for generations as an honoured heirloom, but which the people wanted to present to her as a mark of their respect. And it's made of sea lion whiskers, there's mother of pearl, and there's a long ermine skin as well. And this particular close relationship between the Indigenous communities of Canada and the British Crown continues. So this is another of Queen Victoria's descendants, Prince Arthur, who served as Governor General of Canada between 1911 and 1916. And he was appointed Great Mountain Chief of the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. So they themselves wanted to give him this title, this honour, and here you can see him in the regalia of that. And he is quoted often as saying, "You know what a Canadian I am in feeling." So you can imagine the interest I take in all that is going on there now. So often this gift giving has really formed bonds and cemented those close relationships over time. For the coronation of the late Queen in 1953, she also received this coronation gift from the Kwakwaka'wakw First Nation, which is a chilkat blanket, which would be worn over the shoulders on important ceremonies by esteemed chiefs and so on. And interestingly, while the design is traditionally prepared by a man for blankets like this, they're always woven by a woman. And that was the case here, and that seems very fitting for a gift to a female sovereign. And so this was presented as a coronation gift in 1953, alongside some of the official Government of Canada gifts. So again, you've got these sort of multiple conduits of gift giving from different groups with different interests, different values, and different relations to the Commonwealth. Some of the Commonwealth gifts that are in the Royal Collection today also reflect histories of resistance and conflict. So this boomerang was presented to Queen Elizabeth II by the elder Larry Cunnamulla, who had formerly worked as a resistance fighter who opposed European colonization of Australia. Later on, he served as a tracker for the Western Australian Police Force for over 20 years, and he was awarded the Queen's Coronation Medal in 1954, and he took that opportunity to present this boomerang as a gift to the Queen on that occasion. Likewise, this club or miro, which is a Maori piece from New Zealand, is one of these treasured heirlooms passed down from generation to generation. But it had actually been used in campaigns by Maori against European colonizers in the 19th century. And in 1964, a decision was made to present it to Queen Elizabeth II as a, quote, symbol to preserve the peace between Maori and Europeans of New Zealand. And when it was given, it was thought there was no better custodian for preservation of such peace than Queen Elizabeth II. So here we find the sort of Commonwealth centre point being seen as a place of reconciliation, and particularly it's symbolised through this gift giving of things formerly used in conflict. Queen Elizabeth II also hosted delegates from various Indigenous communities at Buckingham Palace. So this picture shows a delegation who came in 1976 to mark the centenaries of two of the treaties signed with First Nations groups of Canada, which represented Indigenous interests. And again, this was an important opportunity to underline expectations and responsibilities to those communities and to the environment. Well, we've talked a lot about some of the royal events that have prompted gift giving and exchange, but also Commonwealth events specifically have been a part of these moments. On many occasions, members of the British royal family have hosted members of the Commonwealth. So this example shows a Commonwealth dinner, which took place at Buckingham Palace in 1969. And here we've got the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, talking to the late Queen. And then on Commonwealth Day itself in 1972 at Marlborough House, this is a meeting of High Commissioners and their wives with the Queen on Commonwealth Day. Perhaps most famous of all is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And this takes place approximately every 2 years. And although the head of the Commonwealth would not attend the actual meetings themselves, any of the sessions, they would host a reception and a dinner during that conference period. And here you can see Queen Elizabeth II with some of the heads of government in 1977. In 2007, a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting took place in Uganda, and on this occasion, the Queen was presented with this delightful Commonwealth chair. It's known as the Queen's Chogham chair, and you can see an image of her and the kind of title inscribed on it with those colours. The King himself has also attended Chogham events, and here you can see him in 2022 at the Chogham that took place in Rwanda. And the next Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting will be in Samoa in 2024. The Commonwealth Games has also been a central point for the meeting of members of the royal family with delegates from across the world. The Games began in 1930 when they were known as the British Empire Games. They initially featured just 11 countries and 400 athletes. Today, it's a global spectacle with over 4,600 sportsmen and women involved from 72 different nations and territories. And one feature of those games is the baton relay launch, in which the baton is taken from the closing games and makes its way on a sort of journey to the next games itself. And Queen Elizabeth II was often the one to launch these baton relays. You can see an image here of 1970. And as a result, often the batons used for those Commonwealth relays are in the Royal Collection today. So you can see an example there from the Manchester Games and also the Kuala Lumpur Games. And often they reflect different design or a local motif, flora and fauna again, as part of their sort of representation of where the Games has taken place. And this I particularly like, it's quite endearing. These are the security passes worn and used by the late Queen and the late Duke of Edinburgh for the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014. But perhaps the final Commonwealth element we might think of is the Christmas broadcast, which is a tradition that has really touched the Commonwealth over the years. This image shows the Queen's Christmas broadcast in 1970. And you can see here that she's actually pointing to a globe. She's pointing to Australia, and that's because she'd made a visit to Australia, part of the Commonwealth, earlier that year. But interestingly, she's also wearing a silver brooch, which is the silver fern brooch given to her in New Zealand in 1953. And that was during her first visit to New Zealand, when she in fact recorded her Christmas broadcast there, because she was abroad at the time. And that was her first overseas Christmas broadcast. So many members of the Commonwealth today watch that broadcast. And so it's very much seen as a sort of global moment of connection at Christmas. And that's been no different in the reign of His Majesty the King. This still is from his broadcast in 2022, when he specifically mentioned the Commonwealth, and that broadcast was watched by a record number of viewers, 10.6 million people. Well, we've had a slightly whirlwind tour of some Commonwealth gifts presented over the decades. But many of the things that you've seen in this presentation today can be seen on display, particularly at Windsor Castle, as well as across other royal residences. And if you can't make it in person, all of them appear on our collection online. So I hope you'll enjoy exploring them a little bit more and seeing more about the diverse materials, techniques, and traditions they represent, and particularly the bonds of unity and connection across the Commonwealth that have brought them into the royal collection. Now I'll hand back to Amy, and I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. Thanks very much.
Hi, Rachel. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking us on that very much a whirlwind tour of the history of the Commonwealth and gift giving throughout the Commonwealth long lifespan. And I'm personally very much in love with the baskets and the basket weaving. So I will make sure to look out for those on our collections. So I have a first question. So obviously the Grand Vestibule is still open today to members of the public when they visit Windsor Castle. Is that display still displaying gifts that Queen Victoria would have received, and has it been kind of updated throughout the years?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So if you go to the State Apartments at Windsor Castle as part of a visit, you can see over 200 different items that have been presented from all across the globe, including the Commonwealth, but actually further afield as well. And that's been completely refreshed, that display. So we hope to reflect some of Queen Victoria's original intention, which was to share gifts from the Commonwealth with visitors. But she had mainly shown things presented for her Jubilee in 1887. And now there are far more connections and richer connections. Actually, that display today showcases things from every reign, from George III up to His Majesty the King, and from over 100 different countries as well.
So obviously all of them can't fit in the Grand Vestibule. It's quite big, but it's clearly not as big to hold gifts presented to that many monarchs. So if these objects aren't held in the Grand Vestibule, where are they now?
Yeah, so a huge number of these treasured gifts are on display permanently in the royal residences, right up from the Palace of Holyrood House in Scotland to Buckingham Palace in London, as well as others. And many of them have featured in different special exhibitions that we've put on, particularly when we have the summer opening, the State Apartments at Buckingham Palace. We've really used that opportunity to showcase gifts presented to the late Queen in particular, and her visits across the globe. And some of them also feature in our special exhibitions at the Queen's Galleries in London and in Edinburgh, just soon to be renamed the King's Galleries. So do look out for what exhibitions we've got there, because many of them will be incorporated over time.
Fantastic. And so when these gifts are presented to the monarch, do they give gifts back? And if so, do we have any examples of kind of, do we know what the monarch has given back?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And whenever members of the royal family travelled overseas, right back to those early tours by Queen Victoria's children, and they would always take with them gifts for their hosts and for the rulers that they met. And these could vary hugely. It could be anything from a presentation sword, for example, that Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, might have presented to another ruler, to coins, medals, and they'd also present insignia or orders as well. So the Order of the Star of India, for example. In modern times, it's quite frequent now for different world leaders to exchange photographs. Signed photographs is quite a common thing as well. And now in modern sort of exchanges, you might find an example of bequests, so donations to charity, or an animal being given to a zoo, for example, scholarships being named. So it's changed over time, but there's always been gift giving and exchange. And often those items have become treasured parts of the collection in wherever that visit was made.
Fantastic. Have any of the gifts given and displayed in England, particularly in the Great Exhibition, do you think they've had any influence on British artists and art in general?
That is such a brilliant question, and absolutely. So we know from lots of newspaper reports and reviews, for example, of events like the Great Exhibition, that people would go and see the techniques and materials of distant cultures that they might not have experienced up close before. And it would have a direct influence, not just on artists who were designing things, but also on people's buying tastes. So fashions, people would snap up similar sort of objects in the shops as well. So it definitely had a real impact on taste, and particularly in Britain, and the way that people furnished their homes and the kind of art that they looked at and that they enjoyed. So it's been a really sort of vibrant point of connection. And I think those exhibitions and displays have been a really important part of that.
Fantastic. One question I specifically have, some of these gifts are obviously things are made of materials that we don't have in England or Great Britain, porcupine quills, whale's teeth. As a curator, does that cause some issues, some need for learning, some need for personal development on the care of these objects, for the conservation? Is there anything that we've had to learn as Royal Collection, or you've had to learn as a professional yourself about the care of these objects?
Yeah, thank you. So obviously the care and preservation of these pieces is our utmost priority. And as you say, because they've come from all different corners of the globe, they might be made from very different materials that are either unfamiliar or might have very different needs. And I think that's something we found when wanting to display lots of different Commonwealth cultures together through different works of art. You might have one piece that needs very low humidity and one piece that needs a slightly higher humidity, and so on. So putting things together has often been a harder task, and being able to make sure that we appropriately display different pieces. It's also worth saying as well, not just materials, but kind of cultural expectations about how things are displayed. Some things need to be displayed at a particular height or in a particular orientation. And so we need to make sure if we're putting similar pieces or dissimilar pieces in a case together or an exhibition together, that we're taking into account all of those factors. But it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to show the kind of broadest range of materials and techniques than perhaps any other part of the Royal Collection.
Fantastic. Do people from the countries or the communities that have gifted these items to the monarch, do they ask to see them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing we're really delighted by is how international our kind of visitor demographic is. So we often have people from all over the world, particularly coming to places like Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace when the state apartments are open. And I think there's something really fantastic about being able to say you will see something from your kind of home community or region that's being presented historically, and people often are kind of delighted and quite surprised, I think, to find something on display that they hadn't maybe realised was in the Royal Collection. And we do get a lot of interest as well with the material that we share online. And that's why we're so happy that we can publish so much material on our collection online, because anybody can search the catalogue, see images, read about these works. And that's a really nice way, I think, to share globally with the material we have here.
So one question has just popped up for me, which I think is quite an interesting question, is what is the largest gift?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Do you know, off the top of my head, I'm not sure I could say. I might have to think about that. We might have to post it as a sort of later comment on the stream.
Once
I'm
we've
sure there
done
have been some large, definitely there have been some large animals, and I can say there have been some large boats as well presented. So those are probably close, but I wouldn't want to pick something and get it wrong. So I might have to go and do that.
So I imagine they're not in the grand vestibule today.
Harder to display.
So I think for the final question, it might be one that puts you a bit on the spot, I'm afraid, but do you have a favourite gift?
I never comment on a favourite gift. I mean, in part because the collection is so rich and broad and precious that I think it would be it's like picking your sort of favourite child in one sense. And I have to say, I think whatever I happen to be working on at a given moment is the thing that I'm sort of most in awe of. So I wouldn't pick one at all.
Can you share a current favourite, perhaps?
That's a great question. I think I've been really enjoying in today's lecture that banana leaf portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II. I think it's such an iconic depiction, and it's immediately recognisable, but it also so strongly reflects the sort of idiom of the art from Rwanda. So that's something that stood out to me.
I think the thing that stood out to me was the late Duke of Edinburgh's security pass, which said "distinguished guest." I quite like that, or definitely the truck. So I just wanted to wrap this up now by saying thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today and giving a really fantastic talk and showing us some things that perhaps we haven't seen before. I know I'll definitely be walking into the grand vestibule with new eyes and searching for some things perhaps we've seen before. I also wanted to thank everybody who's joined us today, taking time out of their day to kind of listen to our talk. I would say that if you've enjoyed this digital event, we do welcome you to come and check out our future ones. You can see on your screen now a few that we've got coming up, the next 4 we've got coming up. So you can access those, learn how to book those by either scanning the QR code on your screen or visiting us on our website, www.rct.uk/what's-on/online. We have some really fantastic events coming up, including a talk on the field of cloth of gold, descriptive zooms, and as well as Queen Mary's Doll's House, which is going to be a really fantastic one. So once again, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us today. I really hope everybody has enjoyed it. If you want to learn more, like Rachel said, about objects from the Commonwealth, we do recommend going to our collection search. It's very easy. You can just type in anything and it will show up. So thank you very much once again, and good night. Good evening. Good afternoon.